Joining us right now with what we can expect from today's Senate banking hearing, Senator Pat Toomey, lead Republican on the Banking Committee. Good morning to you. We did hear from some of these CEOs yesterday. What are you looking to unpack today that we might not have heard yesterday?
Well, we don't always plow a whole lot of new territory, Andrew. We'll see how it goes today. There will certainly be some more discussion about inflation. It's such a big deal and so important to all of our constituents. I think there'll be some discussion about regulations, especially maybe capital requirements. And then some of us, myself included, will be urging these banks to remember that it's not really necessary for them to weigh in on every social and cultural issue that divides Americans. They actually could focus on their business and do the really important work of banking. So, we'll cover all that ground.
Can we talk about that for a second? Because, and that came up in yesterday's session, perhaps the most sort of hot viral moment actually was when Jamie Dimon was asked whether he would effectively say that they wouldn't finance fossil fuels, and he said absolutely not, and I think that would be a road to hell for America, basically. You have these sort of interesting cross currents right now where these companies are being pressed on both sides. In fact, I would argue to you, interestingly, for a long time was a very sort of, you'd see blue state pension funds and treasurers and things like that try to use their influence, and you would hear from red states and the Republican side say, those are terrible tactics. You should not be using those tactics. You should not be using your influence in those ways. And now you're seeing some of those same tactics being used on the other side. And so if you're in the middle, or if you're a CEO in the middle being the target of this, it's a hard place to be.
Well, it can be a hard place to be, but obviously some of the Republican state treasurers and others have noticed that every single time that big bank leadership weighs in on these cultural and political and social issues, it's always on the left. And after a while, that starts to get kind of annoying, not to mention the fact that, roughly half of all Americans are not on the left of the political spectrum. So look, my advice is just stay in your lane. I mean, we have democratic processes for addressing and trying to resolve as best we can. And yeah, it can be sloppy and it's not usually elegant, but that's how we resolve these issues. The idea of having a handful of senior executives somewhere make these decisions for the rest of Americans, certainly undemocratic and probably in the long run not great for business, because at some point, they'll end up being treated like a public utility if they go too far down this road.
Senator Toomey, I know what you're talking about with some of these decisions. I don't know that the bank CEOs have been front and center for a lot of this. The bank CEOs have gotten pressured to do things like get rid of any overdraft fees, make sure that they are lending to people who might not have qualified in the past. I don't know that that's woke politics as much as, look, some of them think it has made sense. You've had Frazier at Citi say it's good sense for their business. You've had Moynihan say that at Bank of America, that they're doing some of these things because it actually does jive with their customers and it helps their business from the bottom line. I don't think a lot of these CEOs have been front and center, and I think Jamie Dimon has spoken out pretty vociferously.
I'm not talking about those things. I'm talking about when they decide they're going to weigh in on the merits of the Georgia election law, or they're going to weigh in on whether abortion should be readily available.
But I don't think the bank CEOs have weighed in as much on a lot of those issues.
Oh, absolutely they have. They absolutely have. Many of them, not all of them, but many of them have. And they've put out statements and they're the CEOs and chairmen at the time they've done that. But many of them have weighed in on those kinds of issues that are clearly have nothing to do with their core business. No, your point about having a debate about, overdraft fees, okay, yeah, that's a business decision that you got to make. I think it's actually kind of ridiculous if there's an overdraft, that's an extension of credit, and of course there's going to be a fee attached one way or another. But that's different. That's not what I'm talking about.
Let me ask you a different question. Do you think that businesses should be involved in politics at all? So I live in New York City, and we're here in New York City right now. There's lots of questions about crime in New York City, safety in New York City, all of which, by the way, is not just a policing matter, but has to do with the laws in New York State, frankly.
Yeah.
And the question is, should business leaders decide, because they think it's good for their business or their employees have a position which is that they care about their safety, that they should speak out on those issues? And how does that differ from employees calling up their leaders at their businesses saying, you know what, this voting issue to me is actually something that's very, very important if I'm going to actually live in this state and work at your company?
Yeah. So I think the dividing line that I would think about is the extent to which it directly affects a company. If crime is rampant around your company's headquarters, that's a really big deal. It matters. You've got to do something about it or you're going to have to leave, right? But, you know, when you're a company that's headquartered in San Francisco or New York City and Georgia changes its election law, and by the way, it ends up with a more liberal voting regime than New York or Delaware has, the idea that you need to weigh in on that and somehow criticize that, I think that is clearly outside of anything
is this
that's
about weighing?
necessary or
Here's the
appropriate. But
question.
hey, it's a free country.
But is it about the statements that these companies are making that you find troubling? Is it, you know, after Roe v. Wade, and a lot of companies around America said, you know what, we will pay for employees who are in states that are affected to be able to get health care services in other states, without, in many cases, without making statements, but they put those policies in place. Do you have problems with those policies? I mean, these are the questions in terms of, and how much do you want the government to be hands-on, telling companies they can't do that versus on, right?
No, you know, I'm not introducing legislation, Andrew, to forbid this. They are private entities. They have their own governance. They can decide what to do. I'm simply suggesting that they ought to be really careful here. When they become advocates for policy that is not central to their business and that is a very divisive issue, they ought to be careful. There will be a backlash. Some of it will come from their customers. Some will come from future Congresses, probably, if this goes too far. That's my point.
Senator, just overall, your biggest question today that you're going to have in terms of like the actual banking that's taking place, what concerns you? What do you think you want to make sure they get the message on?
Well, you know, one of the things I think we need to underscore is we have this bubbling notion among some of the big regulators that the larger regional banks can't be resolved, and therefore we need to hit them with new big capital requirements similar to what the GSIBs are subject to. And that is a direct contradiction of the fact that they have to submit resolution plans to their regulators. The regulators sign off on those plans. And now they're saying that somehow, despite the fact that we've approved your resolution plan, we don't think you can be resolved. That's a contradiction. And, you know, there is a price to be paid for continuing to layer on ever more capital. Our banks are more capitalized now than they've been probably in my lifetime. They have tremendous liquidity. I don't think anybody believes that the next big financial problem is going to come from our banking sector, at least not anytime soon. And the cost of adding those new capital requirements when they're not necessary means less ability for them to do the business that they do. So I think that's an important issue that we ought to discuss today.
Okay. Senator Pat Toomey, it's great to see you, sir. Thank you. Good luck with the hearing today, and we will look forward to seeing the outcome. You bet.